Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode by the B2B POD. And for this episode, I have the pleasure to welcome my guest, Robert Jordan. So the title of the episode that we have is Why Do Marketing Leaders Get Leadership Wrong?
Welcome to the B2B Pod by the Pulse of Dubai with your host, Radwa Hassan, a podcast that touches upon everything that's going on in and around the B2B industry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode by the B2B Pod. And for this episode, we have a very interesting title, which is Why Do So Many Marketing Leaders Get Leadership Wrong? I believe it's not so many as much as some who don't really get that mix of what makes great leadership or great leaders. And for this episode, I have the pleasure to welcome my guest this episode, Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan is the CEO of Interim Execs, which matches top executives with companies around the world. Based on research with thousands of leaders in companies, he and Olivia Wagner wrote, Right Leader, Right Time, Discover Your Leadership Style and a Winning Career in Company, and have launched the FABS Leadership Assessment, a free assessment at rightleader.com designed to help leaders and organizations perform better. Jordan also authored How They Did It, $1 billion Insights from the Heart of America, and helped publish Start with No, Jim Camp's bestseller on negotiation. Hello, Bob. How are you?
Hi, Radwa. I'm fine. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine, and I'm really looking forward to a great episode and a very interesting discussion. So the episode today talks about why so many leaders get it wrong. Leadership is a deal breaker. Most organizations, because many people get it wrong, or at least some of them, and they don't realize and recognize that they did it wrong. They lead thinking that they're doing their best, and it's really hard for them to have that level of self-awareness to understand that they're really not doing it right. So Gallup organization says that 90% of leaders are in the wrong role. So it's not just us saying it, but there is some pretty good research out there that supports that. There is also, unfortunately, majority of leaders don't get leadership right, and they continue doing that, and it impacts the organizations and their own careers. We do believe that great leadership is scarce. Here in our episode, we're going to hear from Bob. What are the different types of leaders and what is good leadership? So, Bob, thank you so much again for being our guest for this episode. What's your view about this topic and how do you see it?
I think your title is absolutely correct, Radwa. And you cited a great statistic, Gallup organization, 90% of leaders are in the wrong role. The way that this had come to us and why we wrote a book about it is because we've had so many years. We run an organization called Interim Execs, and we're matchmakers around the world. Organizations show up and we match them with great leaders. Well, in the process of doing that, we've been approached by about 7,000 leaders from 50 countries. And we noticed that the vast majority of those people, they were experiencing careers as leaders that were okay. They were just kind of mediocre. They weren't anything that were so good that you would say, this is incredible. And our confidence is so high that if you went into this organization who we're trying to help and they have a problem or a crisis, or maybe even as something good going on, but it's just not within their existing team to solve, the percentage of leaders who were truly incredible was very small, less than 5%. So we started getting into why is that? Why is it that so many leaders are having this experience of leadership that's just kind of mediocre? That's what led us to do the book, Right Leader, Right Time.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I want to read the book definitely, because this is one of the topics that I'm very much interested in. I've seen it through different organizations, and from my experience, how leaders can make it or break it for an organization, how even if they have the best strategy and best teams, but their leadership is really poor, that they don't take this organization to where it should be. So if I go more in details about the different types of leaders that you have mentioned in the book, I know that there are 4 types, and I'm really interested to know more about the different types, if you can mention it to our listeners.
Sure. Love to get into the 4 types. It may help if first I give a little more color in terms of what we mean by leaders who are more showing, I guess the way I would phrase it is leaders who are not showing remarkable results. Remarkable leaders tend to have results that are measurable. So for example, if you were talking to someone and he runs a division of a major corporation and he says things are going really well, and you say, well, what do you mean by that? He says, well, I helped take the division from 100 million in revenue to 500 million in 3 years, for example. That is a kind of thing that is remarkable. If you're talking to a leader and they went into an organization to save it, it was in trouble, it was losing tons of money, for example. And you say, well, what exactly do you mean by save it? And they say, well, there were 2,000 jobs at risk and we saved 1,500 of the jobs. Or we turned it around. They were losing $50 million a year, and within 2 years, we got it back to $250 million in earnings. Those are examples that are quantifiable. Most leaders cannot point to that. Most leaders, it's something that's a more bureaucratic kind of response. So that was how we were measuring in terms of what is the difference between this small set of leaders who are excelling and the majority who are not. Among the small set who were excelling, we saw 4 distinct styles of leadership that were working. So we don't necessarily characterize and say all leaders are one of these 4, but for sure we saw 4 distinct styles among the winners. And the 4 styles are fixer, artist, builder, and strategist, or FABS for short, FABS.
Yep.
So the fixer leader, as the name implies, this is the person who is expert in turnaround. Now, a lot of leaders have to handle some kind of crisis at some point. What differentiates the expert who is a fixer is that once they have had the experience of running into the burning building and saving everyone, metaphorically, that they will then seek to do that again and again and again. And it differentiates from other styles of leadership where a leader could necessarily take on a crisis, but it's not the thing that primarily drives them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So fixer is the style that is drawn repeatedly to crisis. Artist is the style. The artist leader sees and views the world as a canvas. It's a blank canvas to be painted on, or a piece of clay to be sculpted. So in the world, if I was to say the name Elon Musk, I think a lot of people would say, got it. He's an artist leader. He is driven to create, even at the expense of what many other leaders would say would be responsible behavior by a leader. You know, he's continually in trouble with the SEC, and he can't stop tweeting. Those are side issues to the fact that he is an incredible innovator. Or we could look at Steve Jobs.
There are personality. There are personality flaws, or you cannot change the personality. I fully agree with you. There are different styles and how it impacts the organization and the people they lead, but externally and how they behave is also something different. So that doesn't change the fact that they have really strong skills and talents that can change the world in some situations, like when someone really brings in this transformation. And it's like a revolution. It's like the Industrial Revolution with all its different models or different versions. So we cannot deny the fact that these are innovators. Or someone is a fixer of, when you said fixer, it's just like always comes to my mind. Maybe it's a little bit of an old example, not pretty new. When IBM was at a bit of a downside in the 90s and Lou Gerstner was brought into the company, and he did this massive transformation, and he wasn't someone from the IT industry, and his leadership style is really what took the organization to spike back again and to lead into the new era. So I think a fixer is someone who has special talents, who understands and really knows how to turn things around. And the artist is exactly the same. He just sees something that others can see.
Yes. And Lou Gerstner is a perfect example of a fixer. Another great historical example would be Lee Iacocca. He was brilliant at Ford, but he really shined when he went to Chrysler. Chrysler was on the verge of bankruptcy, and Lee Iacocca completely turned it around quickly. So the builder style, everyone in business is a builder. I mean, we all love the title, I'm a builder, I build businesses. We get that, but we mean it specifically. We mean specifically that builder is the kind of style that takes a product, a service, a client, a division, whatever it is they're working on, from a small state that is not market dominant to market dominant. What also distinguishes a builder is that when they have achieved scale or market domination, they tend to get bored, and you'll see a builder leave and go somewhere else to do it all over again. This can be something that's global. It can also be something that's local. I was just in Boston for a fair amount of time, and there's a local bakery in Boston that is dominant. It's called Tate. Mm-hmm. And from what I can tell, they have no aspirations to go to any other major American city. They seem to just be intent on being the best in the Boston area. That clearly is builder genius behind it. The fourth style is strategist. Strategist is the leader who leads at scale. This is the person who is adept with complex or very large organizations where it is completely beyond personal span of control, as Stephen Covey would say. And that requires a different kind of leadership that is not available to the first three styles. Not really. The first three styles are very hands-on with smaller teams. That's FABS, F-A-B-S.
Yep.
This show is brought to you by Logicron, a leading demand generation company, providing solutions and synchronizing all your B2B needs logically.
So I just want to go into the strategist. And with a strategist, do you see that they are a holistic 360 leader who can take, because I see the strategists that they are really at the top and they put a strategy, but some people are very good with strategy. And that when it comes to taking people to execution, if they don't see the link, they fail with the execution. They can put very beautiful strategies, and because they're strategists, sometimes they don't see how it scales down. So do you see that this applies or not?
Well, it's a great question, Radwa. When we say strategist, we wrestled with this label. It could have been the pilot, the conductor, the captain, because we're talking about the orchestration of teams and organizations that are vast and complex. One of the leaders we interviewed, Janine Davidson, Dr. Janine Davidson, she's the former Assistant Secretary for the Department of Defense in the United States. And you're talking about an organization, and she was specifically over the Navy. You're talking about an organization of specific to her, of 1 million people. And the way she described it was, you're at such a level of systems that the actual doing could be your undoing. And that you had to think on such a level of what would have impact in that organization. So The need to be strategic, the need to think strategically, yes. But in terms of the ability to execute as a strategist, I think your phrases initially were great, which is holistic, 360. There are other descriptors that we heard strategists using. You can also tell a strategist very differently from a fixer or an artist or a builder. Strategists, for example, there's always a lot of loyalty to the organization in both directions. There's always mentoring. There's always cross-training. You're not ever going to hear a fixer or an artist or a builder use those descriptors for what they do. The wiring is just so radically different.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, each one of them looks at it differently. So a fixer could be, I mean, that's my point of view, is like a fixer would come and look exactly at the problem and where they need to do the work. But sometimes they just like get not distracted, but they don't see the other areas that maybe needs fixing, but because it's not causing a problem, they don't work on it. But I would say the strategist, for example, is someone who would go by the Kaizen theory, as in, even if it's not broken, we still can fix it, or we can improve it, we can make it better. So they look at the full picture. What I see sometimes with some strategists is like taking it end to end, strategy to execution, is where sometimes there is a gap. And I see also this a lot in marketing. So you build a beautiful marketing strategy, and then sometimes when it comes to executing on it or doing that hands-on, they don't have it. And maybe it's different in sales, because in sales, it's a different thing. But with marketing, if you don't have the hands-on, if you don't have the fixer-builder attitude and characteristics within your personality and your style, you just build a strategy, but you just don't know how to fix the problems. You don't know how to build things with the strategy, and you could just lose this connection. Strategies don't work. So really very interesting, the different styles and how they, I think in some cases, complement each other and work together.
Yes. Yeah, you touched on something that we, in the book, Right Leader, Right Time, we describe what we think are commonalities and characteristics for each one of the styles. And fixer and builder, based on our research, feel very linear. It's very rare to hear that a fixer is turning around two organizations at the same time. And if they are, that would be a warning sign to us, which is, we're not sure they're the best at doing this. Fixer tends to be relentless, 24/7, linear focus on one organization's issues to turn it around. The same could be said of builder, which is this relentless focus on market domination. The contrast, though, is that with artist and strategist styles, I like your word holistic. One of the things we said was it's kind of a multitasking role.
Yeah.
For the strategist, there's a level of complexity and multiplicity of teams that there is no way that you can just keep one thing in your mind forever and that's it, and it'll work. You have to be able to kind of signal jump. And for artists, it's even worse or better. I clearly am, my wiring is artist leader, and I have to have, as I would say, a parallel focus, or maybe it's a parallel lack of focus. There have to be multiple projects going on for me to be able to complete any of them, as strange as that sounds.
To be excited about the task, maybe. It's just like to have them running at the same time.
Yeah, and it crosses over. The artist leadership style, there's a lot of similarities with other kinds of arts, with painters and with musicians. We had a lot of fun with examples in the book that, you take a incredible painter like Monet, Impressionist paintings, and he was probably working on 20 or 30 paintings of haystacks at the same time.
Wow.
Every time the light would change, every 5 or 10 minutes, he'd be working on a different canvas. He had that degree of nuance and discipline in what he was doing that it didn't all become one painting. And you could literally see, in a way, how the sun was setting if you've ever been in an art gallery and they have more than one haystack painting, or a painting of Notre Dame. Notre Dame, You can see the light changing the way Monet painted.
Yeah.
Artist leaders are the same way. We interviewed, and this includes a lot of chief marketing officers, but we interviewed one artist leader and asked him, do you need to work on one thing at a time or more than one? And he like jumped on it. Mm-hmm. He said, I have to have multiple things. Now, this is a guy running a marketing services firm with hundreds of employees. At the same point, he was running a major organization in Rwanda, which was their mission was to create an entire country's worth of entrepreneurs to get the population past genocide. He had committed that as a 10-year project. At the same time, he was the chairman of the Lyric Opera, and it was kind of never ending, but he needed that multiple input.
Wow. Well, I mean,
very different kind of wiring from, for example, a fixer.
Of course, different type of wiring. And it's difficult. Of course, it's just inspires them and probably it gets the best out of them. And that's why the different styles work differently. So you see how they get motivated by different outcomes, or rather way of working on the different projects and bigger teams or complex tasks. And that brings me to ask you, in the marketing field, where or which styles did you see or dominating the most within the marketing?
Yeah, boy, it's a great question. And this sparks for me. Well, first of all, I would say that even for marketers, that a lot of people might think, oh, well, you're in marketing, you must have a dominant artist style. Yes. I'd say yes and no. I say yes and no because they're clearly chief marketing officers and other folks in marketing who are driven by creativity and innovation, but not necessarily. You and I were talking before we started recording, and we were talking about the questions we asked of all the leaders who were interviewed for the book. Mm. And one of those questions was, what happened on your worst day as a leader?
Yeah.
And we didn't mean an agglomeration or just some, piled together response. I mean, like a lot of leaders would say, well, these are the things that would happen on my best day or worst day. We meant exactly, can you recall a day that was just, oh my God, everything is wrong? And one of the chief marketing officers, where we asked this question, he instantly said, they ignored me. And he meant his client. He had a big client project, and he said to be ignored. He said they ignored him, and that was like death for him. And that struck me, which is that answer, for example, is very different among all the four styles. I'll give you an example. Strategist. We did a very big interview with Carol Bernick. Her family owned Alberto Culver, which is a global company, beauty products, hairspray, food products. And we asked Carol. Carol had taken over from her parents. She was the CEO. We said, what happened on your worst day? And she said, the plant blew up. I was like, well, what do you mean?
Yeah.
She said, one of our production facilities in Mexico, she said, we didn't even own the facility, but because we were one of the major customers in the facility, and hairspray is combustible, it can explode. And one day there was an explosion. I'm not even sure it was their product. It might have even been someone else's product, but it exploded. And I think it was 4 people died.
Oh.
And this hit her. It's just, clearly you could tell there's nothing in her career that has ever had any impact like the fact that, someone had died.
Yeah, of course.
And so Alberto Culver kind of instantly got in gear to do things. They made pledges to the community. They took care of the families, the children of the people who had died. They paid all of their expenses and tuition till they became adults. I mean, they really
took care.
They really did things to make amends.
Yeah.
And you could tell from Carol's wiring that that's the way that it would be. But this is how serious it is in leadership.
But yeah, exactly. Because it comes with, I mean, I don't want to relate it too much to the army, but leaders, and this is really one of the areas that I see there is a bit of resemblance, because you lead a team and you need to have certain characteristics when you're leading the team. Because if you don't lead by example, then I think there is something wrong with the leadership style. And so you could have a style, the fixer, builder, but the different characteristics that you prove every day and that you bring to your team is really what makes a difference as well. It's the accountability, the ownership, the integrity, all these things, the commitment to the people you work with, and just the example that you've mentioned, and how the organization really proved to step up and just like take ownership of that awful event and try to make it right. So,
yes,
yeah, absolutely. So if I ask you, what would be the key takeaways that we want to leave our listeners with? If you would mention a few that really people can go and take and act on and stay laser focused on through their leadership journey.
It's a great question, Radwa. The first is going to sound very easy, and it's actually very hard to do, which is that as a leader, over time, as you develop expertise, you have to come to embrace who you are as a leader. You have to come to an understanding within yourself of what, as we would say, is your highest and best use. And while that sounds easy and people will say, well, of course I'm doing that, actually the reality is that the majority of leaders do not.
Yeah.
And what happens over time is that they tend more to dilute their efforts, and that if you were to look at their resumes, they show more of this tendency to try to be all things to all people. And successful leaders do not do that. They are much more likely, our observation was that these highly successful leaders were much more likely to reject what was not for their highest and best use.
Yeah.
I would say as well, it's really important as you discover the thing you love, the thing that you are great at, what resonates, you have to double down. And then you have to do it again. You have to do it again. And this is what leads to more rejection of what is not for your highest and best use. That is what really pointed out to us what was making for successful fixers, artists, builders, and strategists, is that they kept on doubling down within this thing that they loved and really avoiding clients, projects, roles, situations where it was not. I'll give you an example. Sheryl Sandberg of Meta, formerly known as Facebook, she has to be regarded as one of the greatest COOs, chief operating officers of all time, because she went to Facebook when it was a couple hundred employees and about 100 million in revenue. And she took the organization to about 70,000 employees and over 100 billion in revenue. Stack that up against anyone in the modern era for an ability to build an organization, right? She said when she joined there, she probably was going to have a tour of duty that would be 5 years.
Wow.
The first 7 years, I would say, is as remarkable as any leader had. But then what she did was she stuck around for another 7 years. And then things started to happen. You know, there was the Cambridge Analytica scandal. Yeah. There were problems with, election information. There was a shift to Meta that it doesn't seem like she was quite as enthusiastic about. And so part of this is that all of us as leaders can overstay our welcome.
Yeah.
Another way of saying you're not acting in your highest and best use. And so, for example, for a phenomenal builder, we would call Sheryl Sandberg phenomenal builder leader.
Yeah.
She's the same as other builder leaders, which is when you've taken it to scale, it's highly likely that you should move on to something else.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'm just happy that you mentioned Sheryl Sandberg, because To be honest, I think she combines not just one style, but different styles. Like she would go for a builder, definitely a strategist, because really she sees the whole picture, and somehow she must have this artist angle to her style, because what she has done with Facebook Meta is really great. And she was coming from another great company. I mean, coming from Google and going to Facebook, and some people would just like, and she was big in Google. So you would say, it's like, really leaving Google? It's just like going, it's something that's not easy. It's like you're scaling down, you going from the top and taking this challenge of trying to do different things with, I see Meta, Facebook, a controversial company. So it's full of lots of challenges and not easy to take it to where it is right now.
Yes. Yeah. But you're pointing out something that it's really important when you said that Google, Sheryl Sandberg moving from Google to Facebook to this really young organization was scale down or a step down, if you will. But, among confident leaders, she did the right thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure Google, I guess, we did not interview her. My guess is that at Google, she realized her challenge was over and she needed a new challenge. And she did the exact right thing by taking on Facebook. And she was brilliant. She proved it out. I think there were probably signs she should have seen. She became very passionate about writing the book Lean In, which I think was a wonderful thing for her to go do. And those can be signs for someone on their own leadership journey, which is maybe I need to look at something else.
Yeah, new challenge. It's like the artist who needs, or someone who needs to have multiple parallel inspiring projects running at the same time to feel like they're really motivated. So sometimes when it's business as usual, it's not as inspiring and motivating.
Yeah. If I can share one other trait we found as a commonality among FABS leaders, it would be collaboration on steroids. All leaders, we're all trained. We all hear this every day. You have to collaborate. You have to be great at collaboration. I think the majority of leaders probably are not that good at it. They don't necessarily have the confidence that for the thing that they are not absolutely great at, that they could trust someone else on the team or another leader who could be better than them, right? It's something which is not core. And what we saw among the successful FABS leaders was a much greater ability to collaborate, to recognize the contribution of everybody else in the team, and that would produce superior results.
I fully agree on that point. It's really hard. And that point on collaboration as well is do it like you mean it, or rather it's a lot of people talk about it, but not everyone gets it right and they do it genuinely. So yeah, great point there.
One of the psychologists that we interviewed, the way he described it, I thought was funny. He said, you have to be spiky. And what he meant by that is if you were looking at a chart of a variety of traits that you hope for in a company and on a team, these abilities, it's not that any one individual has it all. None of us do. It's that the contribution you make on a team, you have to be spiky in a way that I'm not. And I have to be spiky in a way that you're not. One of the Google managers we interviewed, he said, it's that everyone has to be accretive. They truly have to be additive to the effort of the team, including whoever the leader is.
Exactly. What you're bringing to the team, what you're contributing with. It's not just being a leader. It's really how you're chipping in with creativity or a new idea. It's not just waiting for everyone to chip in, but again, collaboration and understanding the role as a leader within the team. Not everybody gets it right. So, yeah. So to our listeners, I would really encourage you to read Bob's book, Right Leader, Right Time. Discover Your Leadership Style for a Winning Career and Company. A great book and really an eye-opener to so many of the points on the leadership styles, and it would give you great insights. So thank you so much, Bob. Really an exciting discussion. And I look forward to maybe another one where we can elaborate more on the styles and the leadership journey.
Thank you so much, Radwa. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I'm honored.
Thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and have a great evening.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the B2B Pod by the Pulse of Dubai with your host, Radwa Hassan. This show was brought to you by Logicron. If you aren't already, make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can visit us on thepodcast.ae and follow us on social media at the B2B Pod. See you next time.